This is Chapter 1, Part 5 of The Rape of the Mind by Juice A.M. Merleau, M.D. Menticide in Korea. Now let us take a look at the Schwabel case. In its general outline, it is similar to the Mizenti story. It differs only in details. As an officer of the United States Marine Corps fighting with the United Nations in Korea, he is taken prisoner by the enemy. The colonel expects to be protected by international law and by the regulations regarding officer prisoners of war, which have been accepted by all countries. However, it slowly dawns on him that he is being subjected to a kind of treatment very different from what he expected. The enemy looks on him not as a prisoner of war, but as a victim who can be used for propaganda purposes. He is subjected to slow but constant pressures devised to break him down mentally. Humiliation, rough, inhuman treatment, degradation, intimidation, hunger, exposure to extreme cold, all have been used to crumble his will and to soften him. They need to wangle military secrets out of him and to use him as a tool in their propaganda machine. He feels completely alone. He is surrounded by filth and vermin. For hours on end, he has to stand up and answer the questions his interrogators hurl at him. He develops arthritic backache and diarrhea. He is not allowed to wash or shave. He doesn't know what will happen to him next. This treatment goes on for weeks. Then the hours of systematic and repetitious interrogation and oppression increase. He no longer dares to trust his own memory. There are new teams of investigators every day, and each new team points out his increasing errors and mistakes. He cannot sleep anymore. Daily his interrogators tell him they have plenty of time, and he realizes that in this respect at least they are telling the truth. He begins to doubt whether he can resist their seductive propositions. If he will just unburden himself of his guilt, they tell him, he will be better treated. The inquisitor is treacherously kind and knows exactly what he wants. He wants the victim captured by the influence of a slowly induced hypnosis. He wants a well-documented confession that the American Army used bacteriological warfare, that the captive himself took part in such germ warfare. The inquisitor wants his confession in writing because it will make a convincing impression and will shock the world. China is plagued by hunger and epidemics. Such a confession will explain the high disease rate and exculpate the Chinese government, whose popularity is at a low ebb. So the colonel has to be prepared for a systematic confession made before an international group of communist experts. Mentally and physically he is weakened, and every day the communist truths are imprinted on his mind. The colonel has in fact become hypnotized. He is now able to reproduce for his jailers bits and pieces of the confession they want from him. It is a well-known scientific fact that the passive memory often remembers facts learned under hypnosis better than those learned in a state of alert consciousness. He is even able to write some of it down. Eventually all the little pieces fit like a jigsaw puzzle into a complete, well-organized whole. They form part of a document which was in fact prepared beforehand by his captors. This document is placed in the colonel's hands, and he is even allowed to make some minor changes in the phrasing before he signs it. By now the colonel has been completely broken. He has given in. All sense of reality is gone. Identification with the enemy is complete. For weeks after signing the confession, he is in a state of depression. His only wish is the wish to sleep, to have rest from it all. A man will often try to hold out beyond the limits of his endurance because he continues to believe that his tormentors have some basic morality, that they will finally realize the enormity of their crimes and will leave him alone. This is a delusion. The only way to strengthen one's defenses against an organized attack on the mind and will is to understand better what the enemy is trying to do and to outwit him. Of course, one can vow to hold out until death, but even the relief of death is in the hands of the Inquisitor. People can be brought to the threshold of death and then be stimulated into life again so that the torments can be renewed. Attempts at suicide are foreseen and can be forestalled. In my opinion, hardly anyone can resist such treatment. It all depends on the ego strength of the person and the exhaustive technique of the Inquisitor. Each man has his own limit of endurance, but that this limit can nearly always be reached and even surpassed is supported by clinical evidence. Nobody can predict for himself how he will handle a situation when he is called to the test. The official United States report on brainwashing admits that virtually all American POWs collaborated at one time or another in one degree or another, lost their identity as Americans, thousands lost their will to live, and so forth. The British report gives a statistical survey about the abuse of their POWs. According to this report, 1/3 of the soldiers absorbed enough indoctrination to be classified as communist sympathizers. The same report describes in a more extended way some of the sadistic means used by the enemy. If a prisoner accepted communist doctrines, his life became easier, according to the men's stories. But if a prisoner resisted communist doctrines, the Chinese considered him a criminal and reactionary, deserving of any brutalities. The tortures applied to the reactionaries included making a prisoner stand at attention or sit with legs outstretched in complete silence from 4:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. and constantly waking him during the few hours allowed for sleep. Keeping prisoners in solitary confinement in boxes about 5 by 3 by 2 feet. A private of the Gloucester Regiment spent more than 6 months in one of these. Withholding liquids for days to help self-reflection. Binding a prisoner with a rope passed over a beam, one end fixed as a hangman's noose round his neck and the other end tied to his ankles. He was then told that if he slipped or bent his knees, he would be committing suicide. Forcing a prisoner to kneel on jagged rocks and hold a large rock over his head with arms extended. It took a man who had undergone this treatment days to recover the ability to walk. At one camp, North Korean jailers pushed a pencil-like piece of wood or metal through a hole in the cell door and made the prisoner hold the inner end in his teeth. Without warning, a sentry would knock the outer end sidewise, breaking the man's teeth or splitting the sides of his mouth. Sometimes the rod was rammed inward against the back of the mouth or down the throat. Prisoners were marched barefooted to the frozen Yalu River. Water was poured over their feet, and they were kept for hours with their feet frozen to the ice to reflect on their crimes. And we will pick this up in the next video. We are reading from chapter 1 in the Rape of the Mind, and this was video number 5.